At the threshold of a civilizational war, who is preparing a clash between the Islamic and non-Islamic worlds? Can we imagine today that the two largest religions in the world, which have historically maintained numerous points of contact and peaceful coexistence, are on the brink of a brutal and bloody war? Can we fathom that people who currently share a common faith in one God, Quran, Suра 112:1, Bible, Mark 12:29, would tomorrow hate each other and become ideological tools in the hands of those who, under the banners of these religions, are already preparing a division of the world and a clash between the two civilizations? This is about the growing confrontation between the Islamic and non-Islamic worlds, with Christianity forming the core of the latter. There are several prerequisites for such a course of events, which have significantly aggravated in recent years. Terrorist acts, true causes and consequences. Crocus City Hall terrorist attack. Among the key reasons for the emergence of interreligious hatred, it's important to note terrorist acts. Is it a coincidence or someone's malicious intent that most terrorist acts are carried out under the flag of radical Islam? The main problem that follows is that fears, distrust, and hostility arising in the population after such acts are directed towards all adherents of this religion. Consequently, in the USA, after the 9/11 attacks, in several European countries, after March 11, 2004, Madrid, and July 7, 2005, London, in Russia, Beslan and Crocus, and globally, there has been a rise in xenophobia, religious intolerance, acts of violence, and vandalism against sacred objects of this religion. Many people justify manifestations of intolerance towards Muslims as a natural consequence of terrorist acts. However, few consider the true causes of those attacks, their preparation, and the premeditated provocations created by members of certain organizations which have been mentioned in the film The Impact, and will be discussed in detail further in this article. For example, let's consider the recent terrorist attack at the Crocus City Hall in Moscow region, Russia, on March 22, 2024. Crocus City Hall terrorist attack. 4 months have passed since the terrorist attack at Crocus City Hall. Over this time, a bunch of diverse theories and statements regarding this tragedy emerged. However, there are a number of peculiarities and unresolved questions that collectively undermine the official versions of the attack accepted by the authorities and broadcasted by federal media. It's important to note that other countries warned Russia about the possible terrorist attack in advance. Moscow received warnings from USA, Czech Republic. The Czech embassy in Russia expressed concern over reports of possible attacks by extremist groups in major Russian cities. Similar warnings were received from the ministries of foreign affairs of Latvia and Germany. Warnings were also published on the official website of the UK government. Iran. Reuters published an article about Iran warning Russia of a possible security threat prior to the Moscow attack. The article is titled, "Exclusive: Iran alerted Russia to security threat before Moscow attack." It claims that Tehran warned Moscow about a possible terrorist attack after interrogating detainees suspected of being linked to deadly explosions in Iran. Additionally, several questions still trouble many people, indicating that there are some murky areas in this tragedy. How could Russian special services miss such a monstrous terrorist attack after so many warnings? Why in the capital region of Russia, where the number of law enforcement officers per capita is one of the highest in the world, was there no law enforcement capable of protecting peaceful citizens when needed? Why were the emergency fire exits in the Crocus City Hall blocked? It is claimed that the number of victims who failed to escape from the fire exceeds the number of victims from gunshot wounds during the terrorist attack. How did a group of armed individuals manage to reach Crocus City Hall by car, bypassing all cameras, all checks, and all security posts, and shoot peaceful citizens facing no reaction, even though, according to eyewitnesses, police cars were nearby, but no one attempted to prevent the tragedy? How did the terrorists manage to travel 250 miles in a country where any activist is tracked through cameras and detained upon exiting public transport? These questions continue to disturb journalists, relatives of the deceased, concerned Russian citizens, and the international community. In addition, as revealed in The Impact documentary, there have been several coincidences that point to the true beneficiary of this terrorist attack and fundamentally change the problem scale. To see the full picture, let's consider the consequences of this attack, which actually triggered a chain of events and determined a discouraging trend for both Russia and the entire world. Rise of Islamophobia and migrantophobia in Russia. During the first week following the terrorist attack at Crocus City Hall, there was a sharp increase in xenophobic and anti-migrant sentiments. Migrant drivers working for taxi companies reported receiving messages from clients who refused to ride with ethnic Tajiks due to their nationality. Groups of unidentified individuals beat Tajik citizens in the streets. Politicians have started initiating stricter anti-immigrant legislation. In several Russian cities, anti-immigrant police raids were conducted in apartments and dormitories, often involving violence and violations of human rights in the Russian constitution. Even if people had all their documents in order, entire buses were filled with detainees, many of whom were forcibly deported. In St. Petersburg, a large-scale operation called Anti-Migrant was conducted to deport citizens of Central Asian countries. The Ostorozhno Novosti caution news media channel, citing its readers, reported that near the Petrogradskaya metro station and on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, the police were searching cars and detaining men who looked like natives of the Caucasus. BBC Russian service, citing a lawyer defending immigrant rights, reported that over 100 people were awaiting deportation hearings in just one Moscow court this Monday. The police seizes almost all migrants on the street, especially those with Tajikistan passports, the defender said. On April 8th in Moscow, police burst into the apartment of Manas Joldoshbekov, an advisor at the Kyrgyzstan embassy. Police officers broke the lock, damaged the front door, behaved aggressively, and grossly violated the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. They claimed their visit was to check documents and demanded to see the detachable part of the immigration registration form, even after being shown diplomatic passports. Some Russian media reported physical injuries to the diplomat's wife and psychological harm to his minor children. The police raid was confirmed by Kyrgyzstan parliament member Dastan Bekashev. If that's what they do to the embassy staff, I can't imagine what they do to citizens who don't have immunity, he added. Since those detained on suspicion of the Crocus City Hall attack were Tajik citizens, and the Islamic State terrorist organization claimed responsibility for organizing the attack, Islamophobia towards all Muslims has sharply increased across various Russian cities. There have been more cases of online incitement and violence from both civilians and law enforcement. Raids by nationalists began, who demanded immigrants to be fired or forced women to remove their headscarves. Human rights activists note that police detentions were conducted with gross violations of the current laws and established procedures, and with the use of physical violence. It is noteworthy that anti-immigrant narratives and anti-Islamic narratives in general have long been imposed on the Russian population's consciousness. The Crocus City Hall attack has merely unleashed representatives of certain organizations aiming to further divide Russian society. In October 2023, a draft law was submitted to the State Duma, proposing to ban foreign citizens from working in schools, the pharmaceutical sector, state medical institutions, taxis, and freight companies across the country. In November 2023, State Duma Deputy Speaker Pyotr Tolstoy expressed his regret over Russia's passive stance on migrants. He proposed banning citizens of some post-Soviet republics from working as couriers, taxi drivers, and salespeople. The Russian human rights organization Memorial is aware of a number of cases, the actual number may be significantly higher, where the FSB selected random Muslim individuals and fabricated terrorism charges against them. The fabrication was accompanied by torture to extract confessions. Weapons and explosive devices were also planted. The Human Rights Organization notes that it is extremely difficult to generate public outcry over such illegal actions due to the growing Islamophobia in society. According to the Human Rights Center Memorial, in 2021, Russia had 420 political prisoners, 360 of whom were persecuted specifically on religious grounds, with the majority being Muslims. 2017, St. Petersburg metro bombing. Regarding this case, in 2021, the Human Rights Center Memorial completed extensive analysis and concluded that at least 9 out of 11 defendants were not guilty, while the guilt of the remaining 2 was questionable. Nevertheless, 10 defendants received sentences ranging from 19 to 28 years in prison, and 1 was sentenced to life imprisonment. On August 6, 2021, An appeal was considered, resulting in the reduction of sentences for each of the 10 defendants by 1 to 2 months. Torture of detainees in the Crocus City Hall attack case. From the examples above, it becomes clear that torture of detainees by law enforcement during investigations isn't new to Russians. The problem of violence committed by law enforcement agencies has long been known to the public, journalists, and human rights activists. What is new in the case of the Crocus City Hall attack is publicity. Previously, torture occurred behind closed doors, with no videos recorded and posted on social media. This time, the extent to which the brutal torture was made public is unprecedented. Many people witnessed paralyzing and horrifying footage of violence. This precedent by law enforcement basically legitimized the most brutal and lawless treatment of people from Central Asia, which many Russian citizens implicitly accepted towards Muslim communities in general. The lack of condemning reactions to the torture from Russian agencies and officials already contributes to further normalization of this practice among the population, amplifying the already rapidly growing Islamophobia. In response to that, tension and outrage arise among adherents of Islam, further dividing society. Overall dissatisfaction is increasing, fueled by fear for personal safety and complete distrust in the government and the law. Reinforcement of the repressive apparatus within Russia, aimed at further restriction of democratic rights and freedoms that have already significantly dwindled in recent years, can create extreme tension at a critical moment. The spring will break, and the situation will become uncontrollable and irreversible. Who benefits from that? Actions of ROC representatives. After the terrorist attack. On March 27, 2024, an extraordinary Congress of the World Russian People's Council was held, chaired by Patriarch Kirill. At such a large-scale event, one would expect the Russian Orthodox Church to set an example for others, to follow the commandments of Jesus Christ, to unite society, and to remind the flock that fighting the devil with devilish methods is non-Christian. Instead, Patriarch Kirill's entire speech was imbued with a messianic message emphasizing the vital role of the ROC's dominant position in the country and its leadership in patriotism and national defense. The emphasis was made on ROC's history being the sole repository of true patriotic forces in the country, since governments changed, appeared, and disappeared, while ROC always remained. The Russian Orthodox Church is above the parting government because it also carries a great messianic role for Russia and the whole world. Its mission is so important that, forgetting about Jesus' commandment, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And according to the Patriarch's instructions, the WRPC, consisting of ROC priests, should continue to maintain influence in politics and public life. Political systems changed, political preferences changed, but the sense of patriotism in our people remained, and the Church has always been the repository and inspirer of patriotic forces. Patriarch Kirill. I hope that the Council will continue to maintain influence in politics and public life, mobilizing the Orthodox community for further reflection and actions aimed at protecting our fatherland, strengthening the national foundations of our lives, and promoting those spiritual and moral values which the Russian Orthodox Church brings to our country and actually to the whole world. Patriarch Kirill, WRPC Deputy Head A.V. Shipkov, spoke on the topic of the upcoming 26th plenary session of the World Russian People's Council. The topic, Russian World External and Internal Challenges, has been approved. Quote from the website. Given that the reason for the unscheduled Congress was the terrorist attack blamed on non-Russians and non-Orthodox Christians, Patriarch Kirill's statements are perceived from a different perspective. As long as society mourns its loss and clearly identifies the enemy as non-Russian and non-Orthodox, he could hardly miss an opportunity to mention his church's exceptionality. He couldn't but use the moment to apply subtle manipulations and thus further reinforce the dominant position of the titular religion in the country. Moreover, he couldn't refrain from giving society a hint at the unreliability of transient authorities, whose negligence may have resulted in the terrorist attack, while ROC has always been a source of sincere, non-opportunistic patriotism. At that, the topic of WRPC's upcoming 26th plenary session, Russian World External and Internal Challenges, approved at the Congress, stands out particularly. One more point regarding the authorities' unreliability is worth noting. The 8th presidential elections in Russia were held between March 15 and 17, 2024. The final result was announced by the Central Election Commission on March 21, 2024. The next day, on March 22, 2024, the terrorist attack at Crocus City Hall occurred. Many people noticed that the Crocus attack overshadowed Vladimir Putin's victory in the presidential elections, causing the public to doubt the elected president's ability to protect people. Who benefited from that? Knowing this fact casts Patriarch Kirill's speech in a different light. The decree of the World Russian People's Council was published on the Moscow Patriarchate's website, and they didn't forget to mention the new migration policy in it. In this very decree, the war in Ukraine is referred to as holy, and there's a conclusion that the entire territory of present-day Ukraine must fall under Russia's sole influence. It is Muslims who are typically accused of using the term holy war, thus being labeled as terrorists. But who are the real terrorists then? The Impact documentary provides a detailed account of the Ukraine-Russia war, the influence of anti-cult organizations, particularly Ratseers, on this war, and their prolonged informational manipulation of the population, involving methods similar to those used by the Nazis prior to World War II. Labels. Tajik equals terror. After the Crocus City Hall terrorist attack, nationalist inscriptions saying Tajik equals terror appeared on houses in the city of Oral, where Tajik citizens supposedly reside. Earlier, Oral residents had petitioned Governor Klitschko for mass deportation of Tajiks from the Oral region. The practice of labeling individuals based on their nationality, religion, or worldviews isn't new. Nazis in Hitler's Germany did that by putting yellow star badges on Jews. Likewise, the anti-cult Nazis of the 21st century use labels such as sect or cult. Labeling is an indispensable step in dehumanizing undesirable individuals or groups in the eyes of society. This kind of a label marks the target for extermination. After the failed assassination attempt on July 20th, Hitler applied an ancient tradition known as Sippenhaft to punish those who were deemed traitors. According to Sippenhaft, a person could be guilty by association. Responsibility extended from those involved in the failed attack to their family members, friends, and colleagues. This tradition was used to justify imprisonments and sometimes even murders of thousands of people. It is this method of guilt by association that is used today by anti-cult organizations like Fekris, Ratseers, and their numerous affiliates worldwide. If a person belongs to an undesirable organization, rather than the titular religion of the country, they are branded a sectarian. Being labeled as such, they fall outside the social space and are no longer seen as human by society. The same pattern is evident in Russia. If one is a Tajik, hence they are a terrorist. This dehumanizing method brings us back to a historical fact. Before 1917, the Orthodox Christian Church in the country was called the Orthodox Church of Russia, OCR. In 1943, the Russian Orthodox Church appeared. The designation of nation came to the forefront, whereas orthodoxy was relegated to the background. Exactly nationality is emphasized, not citizenship. There is a significant difference between the Orthodox of Russia and Russian Orthodox. Previously, regardless of nationality, a person holding a Russian passport was considered an equal member of Russia's society, and similarly could be an equal member of the church. Today, even with a Russian passport, if one is not Russian by nationality, the Russian church, with its monopoly and significant influence over the authorities, will not be their church in practice, despite its de jure claims of Christian values and love for one's neighbor. A dual association is evident. If a person is not Orthodox and also not Russian, then who are they if, in either case, they are no longer considered human? In light of this year's events, we recall that those who tagged Jews with yellow stars might not have personally killed anyone, but they incited violence by marking the targets. Returning to the World Russian People's Council Congress, alongside ROC hierarchs, one of the leaders of the anti-cult movement in Russia, the controversial critic of Islam and colleague of Russian anti-cultists, Roman Anatolievich Silantiev, was present there. Roman Silantiev was elected to the counting commission of the delegates, as noted on the WRPC website. Among the ROC clergy, many hierarchs officially belong to regional anti-cult centers for combating sects. Leading anti-cultist and destructologist Roman Silantiev sees Islam as a grave danger to Russia and a primary source of potential instability. In his book, The Newest History of Islam in Russia, Silantiev references Tatar politician and historian Raphael Kakimov, who believes that Islam aligns with European values such as tolerance and democracy. However, Silantiev later argued that the term tolerance had failed as a symbol of tolerance for evil and destructive pacifism. The rise of Islamophobia worldwide. Quran burnings and vandalism of Islamic shrines. The terrorist attack at the Crocus City Hall this year and its associated events are significant examples, but they are far from isolated incidents. They are part of a broader global trend. Other countries also experience terrorist attacks and activities of anti-cult organizations, such as FECRIS, DCI-CCMM, Miviludes, UNADFI, and others, which include representatives of the dominant religion in their respective countries. These anti-cultists also influence laws, media, societal rhetoric, and shape public opinion. Let's examine the example of France. On January 7, 2015, a terrorist attack was carried out against the editor office of the satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo in Paris, marking the beginning of a series of attacks in France. According to eyewitnesses, after the attack, the terrorists shouted that they had avenged the Prophet. Previously, Charlie Hebdo had repeatedly published controversial cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, alongside other French publications such as François, Libération, and Le Monde. Since 2006, these cartoons have been reprinted in other countries, in Norway by Magazinet, in Germany by Die Welt, in Spain by El País, in Belgium by De Standaard, as well as by newspapers in the UK, Italy, Iceland, Switzerland, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Sweden, Poland, and others. In 2007, the Swedish newspaper Nerikes Allehanda published another cartoon depicting the Prophet with the body of a dog. These publications triggered a prolonged intercultural conflict between Muslims in the Arab world and contemporary Western culture, affecting almost all European and Muslim-majority countries. However, French newspapers are not the true culprits of the conflict, but merely accomplices and instigators. The initial publication that set the precedent was an article in another country, published in the Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten in 2005. Other countries joined these publications in 2006, exacerbating the conflict. This led to massive protests by Muslims in Eastern countries and in Europe. While the public scandal escalated into a global political crisis, Denmark became a precedent for prolonged tension and future human casualties. Instead of accepting the consequences and taking responsibility, provocations in Denmark continued. On February 12, 2006, vandals desecrated over 25 Muslim graves in the city of Esbjerg, western Denmark. On February 16, 2008, 5 Danish newspapers reprinted the cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad with a bomb-shaped turban, one of which was Berlingske Tidende. After the terrorist attack in France on January 7, 2015, a public seminar titled Art, Blasphemy, and Freedom of Speech was organized in Copenhagen, Denmark, to honor the victims of the Charlie Hebdo shooting. On February 14th, at around 4 p.m. local time, 22-year-old Omar Abdel Hamid El Hussein opened fire at the seminar, killing 1 civilian and wounding police officers. The event was attended by the same artist, Lars Vilks, who had depicted the Prophet Muhammad as a roundabout dog in 2007. France, Denmark. The anti-cultists Mark in Islamophobia, Jyllands-Posten and Johannes Agard. Let us return to the Danish publication that set the precedent for a prolonged conflict, contributing to the rise of Islamophobia, societal division, and the deaths of innocent people. Notably, this media outlet has incited hostility not only against Islam, but also against other religious organizations, employing Nazi methods of dehumanization and labeling undesirables as cults. But let's recall that when Muslim countries diplomatically demanded apologies for the mockery of the Muslim prophet, this publication defended itself by invoking freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of expression. This approach is typical of anti-cult organizations, who are direct followers of the Nazis. Anti-cultists always resort to the presumption of innocence, freedom of speech, freedom of belief, pluralism, and democracy to protect themselves, but conveniently forget these principles when dehumanizing others. 2 years before the infamous cartoons, in 2003, an article titled "Successful Sect Without Mercy" was published, referencing Johannes Agard and the Dialogue Center in Aarhus. Sects like Scientology should be controlled much better by the Danish authorities. says Professor, Doctor of Theology, Johannes Agard. In his opinion, Scientology is a money-making machine, and no one knows who is behind it or where the money goes. In this case, the final publication is presented with an exclusively biased and one-sided position, with a clear subtext and manipulation. It disregards the presumption of innocence, pluralism of opinions, and other fundamental principles of democracy. This biased position can no longer be considered qualified or coming from an unbiased expert, especially since the expert in question is Johannes Agard. In 1973, Johannes Agard, with the help of Wilhelm Hack, organized the anti-cult organization Dialogue Center International. This would be unremarkable, except that the Dialogue Center is a direct prototype of the Apologetics Center created under the Protestant Church in 1921, which laid the foundation for the Third Reich. From 1932, it was led by Walter Kunneth, and Wilhelm Hack was a direct follower of the Nazi Apologetics Center, studying Protestant theology in Bavaria at the University of Nuremberg during the same period when Walter Kunneth was a professor of Protestant theology there. Walter Kunneth not only led the Apologetics Center, but also actively collaborated with Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels. Detailed information is provided in the documentary film The Impact. It is also noteworthy that Johannes Agard considered Scientology particularly dangerous for a long time, but later stated that Islam posed an even greater threat. In 2007, Jyllands-Posten published an article praising Johannes Agard and calling him the church warrior. The 2015 terrorist attack in France and the preceding events illustrate the potential consequences a single publication in one newspaper can lead to when it serves anti-cultists. To this day, media outlets across different countries continue to reference Jyllands-Posten. This is especially true for sources that, like the Danish newspaper, pursue an anti-cult Nazi policy, fight against cults, and serve as conduits for informational terrorism. In particular, the Czech online publication Seznam Zprávy has repeatedly relied on this source in its publications. In conclusion, it is worth noting another disturbing fact. In 2023, there was a series of provocations involving the burning of the Koran, which were filmed. Denmark, Germany, Sweden, Russia. While the precedent of burning the Koran has occurred in the past, France in 2010, Russia in 2014, and other countries, the 2023 incidents suggest a deliberate provocation aimed at triggering a larger conflict. Reflecting on the examples of terror attacks in France and Russia, where innocent people suffered, one must wonder, how many more sacred Islamic texts need to be burned to escalate the situation to the breaking point? How many more mocking cartoons of the Prophet are needed before the tension springs out of control? How many more terrorist attacks will it take to ignite the flames of total confrontation and split the world in two? We are already witnessing anti-cult activities leading to an inevitable nuclear confrontation between Islam and non-Islam, to a global nuclear war. In this war, Islamic countries will stand up for Muslims who face constant oppression and discrimination. The rest of the non-Islamic countries, with Christianity as their largest religion, entering the struggle against the Islamic world, will believe they are fighting a religion of hatred, failing to see beyond the anti-cult blinders that Islam, in its essence, is a source of morality, peace, and love, just like other religions. Muslims living in Christian countries will face a choice. Staying on the sidelines will not be an option, as the rest of the world will rise against their religion, their people, and their values. With approximately 1.9 billion Muslims worldwide, who will win is a rhetorical question. However, considering the presence of nuclear weapons in various countries, there will likely be no winners. This will be the most devastating and possibly final war of humanity. Is it worth falling for provocations today, listening to the inhumane calls and incitements from anti-cultists in the media, in power, and in religion? Perhaps it's time to put an end to the activities of anti-cultists, these individuals who consider themselves gods, and thereby save billions of innocent lives.